LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 21st edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 15 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start with some political comedy from Alec Baldwin doing his season finale as Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live last night, and then some jokes from the Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, some Bill Maher jokes from his monologue, all basically on the topic of impeachment and, of course, the ongoing Russia scandal. And impeachment is just like barely being talked about, but I am wearing impeachment peach, and I will talk about obstruction of justice and what impeachment requires as well. As I get into the broadcast, there's the one big topic. If you look down in the video description, there's a link to this list of 15 clips, and there's some still images I'm also going to use. And let me just get right to the first clip. It's a very short clip. Alec Baldwin first. They sang the Hallelujah song that they had Hillary Clinton sing the Saturday after she lost the election. Not the actual Hillary, not Hillary Clinton herself, but Kate McKinnon playing Hillary Clinton, saying this Hallelujah song, saying, that she, was gone. And this is sort of like Donald Trump might be gone, although at the end of this he claims he's not going to be gone, which I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
I'm not giving up because I didn't do anything wrong. But I can't speak for these people.
So that actually might be Donald Trump's undoing, is all those people behind him. They brought in just about everyone except there was no Melissa McCarthy as Sean Spicer. They even had, now I'm like blanking on her name, as Ivanka Trump, Savannah, whatever. You can tell me down in the comment section. I appreciate I almost have 100 live viewers already at the beginning, so I don't want to dawdle too much between the clips, but I am going to talk more about impeachment and how it's getting just barely mentioned. That wasn't really impeachment. That was like defiance against impeachment in the cold open there, but they were more explicit about impeachment in some of the jokes on Weekend Update, and they also described some of Donald Trump's problems that I'll get to in the news clips. But here's how it got into the culture through the season finale of Saturday Night Live, Weekend Update, some jokes from Colin Jost and from Michael Che that I'll talk about with you after we watch those together over here.
Okay, I know I said this last week, but this week was crazy. Obviously, Trump's not done yet, but let's just say Mike Pence is definitely warming up in the bullpen. With the White House reeling from allegations of obstructing justice, President for now Trump said point blank that he never told FBI Director James Comey to end the Russia investigation. So this sets up a real dilemma. Who are you going to believe? The head of the FBI or the guy who's definitely lying? It was also reported that Trump asked Comey when he would publicly announce that Trump was not under investigation, which sounds pretty suspicious. If you're watching an episode of Law & Order and the husband asks the detectives, so when are you going to announce I'm not a suspect in my wife's disappearance? That guy definitely buried a lady in the woods. It was reported yesterday that President Trump told a Russian official, quote, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job." Which actually makes sense, because the only people Trump ever interacts with are conspiracy theorists, Russian gangsters, and Scott Baio. Comey is probably so normal that to Trump, he seems insane. He's like, you got to meet this lunatic. He's got one wife, owns 0 helicopters, and he doesn't even believe Hillary Clinton runs a sex ring out of a pizza shop. Total nut job. In the end, I'm just happy that a nut job wasn't something that happened to Trump in a Russian hotel room.
It was also reported in that same meeting that Trump revealed classified intelligence. Well, of course he did. He's just excited to let people know that he knows stuff. Trump handles government secrets like my aunts handle church gossip. I bet everything he leaks to Russia starts with "Russia girl, sit down."
I liked the way that Colin Jost gave the news of the week and the way Trump was getting in more and more trouble, and even brought up the idea of Vice President Michael Pence in the bullpen warming up. Like I said, impeachment is sort of getting into the zeitgeist already. and I will talk about impeachment and obstruction of justice a little bit later. I also like that Michael Che joke that at the end had, I think that is probably what is behind a lot of Donald Trump's troubles is his ego. He wants to like appear smart. That's what Michael Che was saying, that the reason he gave classified information and bragged about firing Comey and how he was taking care of things, he wants to appear smart and important and needs affirmation. And I don't know, I don't think he has a really good temperament to be president. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section. Now, having shown those two clips, I think were the best of Saturday Night Live. The season finale I didn't think was all that great. There was a nice appearance by Tom Hanks in a couple places I thought was funny. And I thought some of those jokes I just showed you were funny, but not their best effort. And I did miss Melissa McCarthy. I don't know. I guess she's like, I heard she on, I think there was a Jeopardy clue that said she was the second highest paid actress in Hollywood. That was like Final Jeopardy a few weeks back. So that must be true if it was on Jeopardy. So maybe that's why she didn't make it to Saturday Night Live. But I want to get to the way Bill Maher treated basically the same two subjects that you saw covered on Saturday Night Live in his political comedy, in his monologue, before I get to the actual news clips about impeachment and the ongoing Russian scandal. And the first clip has to do with what you saw Colin Jost talk about at the beginning of that last clip, how it seems like it's just ongoing. It's an ongoing barrage of every day it's something, and you'll see that in the actual news clips I'm going to show in a minute. But here you'll see Bill Maher talk about it at the beginning of his monologue. In this is about an 84-second clip that I will show you and then talk with you about after we watch together here.
It's so hard to catch you up on this week because it's like last week never even really ended. We should start this show like all the other HBO shows. Previously on. Previously on As the World Burns. President Batshit had just fired his FBI director for investigating his Russian ties and then met the Russians in the Oval Office to get his next assignment. And of course, pass along classified information. No wonder these guys are laughing. He gave it to them in person in the Oval Office. They're like, this guy is even dumber than we thought. Of course, Trump should not have even had them in the Oval Office. These are the people who hacked and meddled in our election. That's not part of the controversy. That is a fact. They meddled in the election. And Trump says, wait, listen, Trump says, well, Putin asked me to do it. What am I supposed to say? Come on, I work for the guy. I mean, what am I going to tell the boss no?
And you saw basically that same theme both in Saturday Night Live and Bill Maher, that Donald Trump is a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And you may remember one of my favorite lines from the debates that we covered back during the election on these broadcasts is, puppet, no puppet, you're the puppet. That was Donald Trump saying he was not a puppet. So I guess we'll find that out at some point. There's this great attack on Vladimir Putin from John McCain coming up, and also Lavrov as a stooge of a thug that I will be showing later in the program. But I have one more political comedy clip. This is Bill Maher talking more specifically about impeachment, and then I'm actually going to give you a little bit of legal analysis about obstruction of justice and impeachment. If I can figure out where I put my Constitution after I show you this. This is about 2 minutes on basically impeachment and more of the Russian scandal from Bill Maher's monologue last Friday here.
Okay. And then this week, we learned that, oh, I love this, James Comey kept meticulous notes and memos on all his meetings with Donald Trump, including, according to the Comey memo, where Trump meets with Comey and says to Comey, Flynn, he's involved with the Russians. Gosh, Jesus Christ, he's a good guy. I hope he could just let this go. hope you can let this go. Comey said, you know I'm a cop, right? I hope you can let this go. When Vice President Pence heard that, he started scratching out Vice on his business cards. And then today, we learned that Trump said to the Russians during that play date he had with them, he said in front of note takers to the Russians, I just fired the head of the FBI. He was a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken care of. Is he trying to get impeached? Even Monica Lewinsky is like, wow, you really blew it in the Oval Office. Because you know what? All this is good news. We have a special counsel now, Robert Mueller. I doubt that Trump will be president for the full term. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he might not be president by the time he gets back from his trip. You know, he left today on his big overseas trip. One huge question hangs over this trip. While he's gone, who is going to lie to Mike Pence? We don't know this.
So Bill Maher actually raising the question as to whether Donald Trump will be president by the end of his trip. And that seems like way too optimistic as to when Donald Trump might end his time as president of the United States. You may remember I posted a card last week, a poll as to whether Donald Trump was guilty of obstruction of justice. This week the poll is on whether Donald Trump is going to complete his term or whether he'll have to leave early for any reason. It's just a yes or no question. Last week it was a three-part. Here's the poll results from last week. Is Donald Trump guilty of obstruction of justice? Yes, he is guilty. 76% said. Maybe need more information, 21%. That's the right answer if you watched the show carefully last week. And then no, he's innocent, 2%. That seems highly optimistic, but I suppose that's possible. Yeah, maybe since 76% of the people last week got the answer that I did not think was the correct answer, I should do like my John McLaughlin impression, say, wrong, the answer is B, or is C, need more information, or no, I'm sorry. I used to watch John McLaughlin and the McLaughlin Group all the time. Now he just died in the last year, so I guess that's my tribute to John McLaughlin and everything he taught me over the years of watching these Sunday morning and weekend news analysis shows that I've been watching for 25 years. That's one of my qualifications for giving you all this commentary every week. And as to the question of impeachment, you need to look in your Constitution. You remember we looked in our Constitution back when Donald Trump fired James Comey to see if he had the power to do that. And right in Article 2, Section 1, that's where Donald Trump got the power to fire James Comey, because Article 2, Section 1 says all executive power shall be in the President of the United States. So that means he is the boss of the whole executive branch, which includes the director of the FBI, who's under the Attorney General as part of the Department of Justice. And we have some tradition of, a 10-year term for some independence in the FBI, but that's just that's a norm. That's not a law, right? The difference between norms and laws. I think Donald Trump just has no care about norms whatsoever. So that was his ability to fire the director of the FBI in Article 2, Section 1. Well, if you go to Article 1, Section 2, you'll see that it takes the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment, is at the end of Article 1, Section 2, and so it just takes a majority vote, because it doesn't say, it just says they have the power, it doesn't say some supermajority in the Constitution. And then you go to Article 1, Section 3, where it says that the trial will be in the Senate. If it's the President, the Chief Justice shall preside. It's on oath or affirmation, and it takes 2/3 of the senators present to remove or to punish the President. I guess they can censure the president. I don't know. That's never really happened. But for those of us who lived through the Bill Clinton impeachment, impeachment does not mean removal. That's like the indictment by the House. It just takes a majority of the House. And basically, if you want there to be impeachment of the president, Democrats have to win the House, or a huge number of Republicans have to decide Donald Trump is so toxic they're better off with Vice President Mike Pence becoming president. So that's where you can find in the Constitution what needs to happen for impeachment. And basically, I have the poll question. You can click on this little eye up here and answer the poll question as to whether you think Donald Trump will complete his term. He's also kind of old and not in all that great health, unless you believe the letter his doctor wrote about him being the healthiest president ever, but he doesn't look like he's in great health. So there are other ways that he might end up not being not fulfilling his term. So I guess it's not like last week where I think there was a right answer. And I'm going to talk more about obstruction of justice when I show guests on the show, on the morning shows, talking about obstruction of justice. But now I actually want to move on to a couple of news reports. Because of Donald Trump's trip to the Middle East and then to Rome, there wasn't a lot of coverage. It did definitely cut down some of the coverage of the Russia scandal, and there are only a couple clips that even mention impeachment, and you'll see Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union in a few minutes kind of scoffing at the idea as ridiculous. But there were two news reports on what happened the last week, and they're kind of similar. I'm going to compare and contrast them. The first one's from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, reported by George Stephanopoulos, then John Dickerson at the beginning of CBS's Face the Nation, and they both kind of had the same theme of, like, every day there's like more problems. Every day's problems. Isn't that a reggae song? Well, it's like, it seemed like there was some new scandal every day, all the way up till Friday. Everything broke right when Donald Trump was taking off on this trip that was supposed to change the subject, and it did change the subject a little bit, but there was still a lot of coverage, as you'll see, starting with this 2-minute clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
Also hopes that this whole trip will bring a welcome break from the most battering week of the Trump presidency, a daily cascade of damaging headlines. Monday, the Washington Post reports that the president revealed highly classified information about ISIS to the Russians in the Oval Office, compromising a key source and complicating our intelligence relationship with Israel. Tuesday, the New York Times reports that Trump privately tried to get FBI Director James Comey to drop his investigation into former National Security Advisor General Flynn. "I hope you can let this go," he said, according to Comey's memo of the meeting. Wednesday, the president blindsided by his own Justice Department. The acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has decided to appoint a special counsel to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 election. Joining this from the president on Thursday.
Well, I respect the move, but the entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign.
And Friday, less than 2 hours after Air Force One took off for Saudi Arabia, two more bombshells from the Washington Post New York Times tag team. The Post reporting that a senior White House official has been identified as a person of interest in the Russia investigation, reaching closer than ever to the Oval Office. And the Times revealing more about that extraordinary Oval Office meeting with the Russians. Remember the timing of that meeting. Less than 24 hours after the president fired FBI Director James Comey, who was leading the investigation into Russia in the 2016 campaign. In his first face-to-face meeting with Russian officials, Foreign Minister Lavrov, Ambassador Kislyak, the president tells them, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I face great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." So many questions swirling about that meeting, the timing, what exactly was said and why. How will the Russians use what they learned? All that fodder now for the special counsel and Congress. And one of the few people in that meeting...
One of the few people in that meeting is going to be Rex Tillerson, or no, is it H.R. McMaster? H.R. McMaster with George Stephanopoulos, and then on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, Rex Tillerson were in that meeting with the Russians, and you'll see they both had these non-denial denials as to what the New York Times reported about Donald Trump saying that he fired Comey because he was a nut job, and now he was going to have like more latitude on, he's going to take off the pressure on the Russian investigation. You'll see they both don't really deny it. They just have a different interpretation. And by the way, before I get to the CBS story that's kind of on the same topic, hopefully, I've been having some problems with my software, but I'm going to try to import this screenshot from the Super Chat donation I just got from, I think it's Ecatox. Is that how you pronounce that? And if you could read that, it was a little small. It was a $10 contribution, and I have not read the S word, but I do agree that Democrats have to let the investigation run its course and focus on the issues and not get ahead of themselves on impeachment. And basically what I was saying in my analysis earlier is wow, Sandy and Dash are both here. I'm like surrounded by pets, and I don't know what the... Oh, you want to come up here? You want to look in the camera? Maybe I get the cat to come up and look in the camera. But, I basically, there is no chance of impeachment unless the Democrats take the House or Donald Trump becomes so obviously toxic that he doesn't have 80+% of Republicans supporting him in polls, which he does right now. So that is definitely true, and I appreciate that super chat contribution. It looked like I did get some ads on my video about halfway through the week, and then there was this big uptick in views over the weekend, I think because of Saturday Night Live doing their season finale. I got an uptick on last week's Saturday Night Live clips, so that was a little bit helpful, but I also appreciate my new Patreon patrons. You can become a Patreon patron at a link down in the video description, and super chat contributions like that and questions that you ask. I try to check those out during the broadcast if my software will let me. And now I want to show that CBS clip, which also talks about those same scandals and also, I think, makes things look really bad for Donald Trump in some similar ways to ABC, but I'm going to contrast it a little bit after we watch that clip together here.
Another week of chaos and distraction for President Trump, and he wasn't happy about it.
No politician in history, and I say this with great surety, has been treated worse or more unfairly.
But much of the trouble was self-inflicted. Monday, the Washington Post reported that the president had given the Russians highly classified information that normally wouldn't be shared with friendly countries, let alone an adversary. Tuesday, the New York Times reported that the FBI had a memo from former FBI Director James Comey that said the president had asked him to let go of the federal investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Republican Senator John McCain was reminded of previous presidential tampering.
I think we've seen this movie before. I think it's reaching the point where it's of Watergate size and scale.
The biggest news came Wednesday when a special counsel was named to investigate Russia's involvement in the 2016 presidential campaign. President Trump was asked about the decision.
Well, I respect the move, but the entire thing has been a witch hunt.
Friday, a flood of revelations as the president left on a carefully planned 8-day foreign trip. The first headline, the FBI investigation is looking at a senior official close to the president. The second, that the investigation now includes the possibility of a White House cover-up. And the third, that the president told the Russians something else in that meeting, that firing FBI Director Comey had relieved him of the pressure of his investigation.
And I like that CBS report as well. I thought the CBS report used clips better, and as a user of clips, I'm glad to see someone using clips. There was a good clip of John McCain there that there'll be a follow-up question to John McCain. They cut it though when you see the question asked of John McCain a little later, you'll see that they cut the part where he talks about another shoe dropping from the centipede, which I think I've shown 2 or 3 clips of him in the last few months talking about the Russia scandal, that there's going to be another shoe dropping from the centipede. So I was sorry to see that was not, his overuse of that phrase was not documented by CBS's Face the Nation in that story. So that would be my one criticism there, to make it fair use, since I think sometime around June 1st, CBS may be coming after me with a DMCA takedown based on some Donald Trump clips I used a few weeks back. June 1st is the deadline for them to decide whether to send the takedown, and somehow I think they're going to do it based on my experience with them last year. But that's why I just have that short CBS clip that I am very critical of, and also somewhat I'm praising its use of clips, but criticizing the way that they did not show the full clip of John McCain. And now I want to move on to that couple clips that I promised of Trump administration officials who were in the room during that Trump visit with Russian officials in the Oval Office. You saw the New York Times story at the end of the CBS clip I just showed that Trump told these Russian officials, Kislyak and Lavrov, that he fired James Comey because he's a nut job and it's going to take off the pressure on the Russia investigation. And in the room were H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, as well as Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, and they were both on two different shows, and they were both asked, well, you were in the room, did he say that? And you'll hear, and George Stephanopoulos goes after him for about 3 minutes till he gets this like dead end at the, and he asks actually longer than I'm showing, but all he gets is this dead end at the end about how we've talked too much about this private conversation. I'm not going to reveal any more details, but you'll also see there's kind of a non-denial denial that Donald Trump said what the New York Times claims he said. It's more of a, well, we spin it a different way over in this clip.
Some questions about that meeting you all had with the Russian foreign minister. New York Times, as you know, reporting that here's what the president said in the meeting. I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off. Is that what the president said?
Well, I don't remember exactly what the president said, and the notes that they apparently have, I do not think are a direct transcript. But the gist of the conversation was that the president feels as if he's hamstrung in his ability to work with Russia to find areas of cooperation because this has been obviously so much in the news. And that was the intention of that portion of the conversation.
Did you know he was going to report that to the Russians, and what did you think when you heard it?
Report what, George?
What he said about James Comey, that he'd fired him, and why?
Well, the firing had been in the news, but I didn't know in advance that the president was going to raise it. But as I mentioned, he raised it in the context of explaining that feels as if he's been unable to find areas of cooperation with Russia, even as he confronts them in key areas where they're being disruptive, like Syria, for example, and the subversive activities across Europe, their support for not only the Assad regime, but for Iran and its activities across the Middle East.
Did you understand how this might look, though, to an average American right now? You have the President of the United States telling the Russian foreign minister in their first meeting that the pressure is off because he's fired the FBI director investigating Russian interference in the campaign. Does that seem appropriate to you?
As you know, it's very difficult to take a few lines, to take a paragraph out of what appear to be notes of that meeting, and to be able to see the full context of the conversation. As I mentioned last week, the really purpose of the conversation was to confront Russia on areas, as I mentioned, like Ukraine and Syria, their support for Assad and their support for the Iranians, while trying to find areas of cooperation as in the area of counterterrorism and the campaign against ISIS. And so that was the intent of that conversation, was to say, what I'd like to do is move beyond all of the Russia news so that we can find areas of cooperation.
So did the president confront them on their interference in our election? This was their first meeting.
Well, there already was too much that's been leaked from those meetings. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about is the confidence, the confidentiality of those kind of meetings, as you know, are extremely important. And so I'm really concerned about these kind of leaks because it undermines everybody's trust in that kind of an environment where you can have frank, candid, and oftentimes unconventional conversations to try to protect American interests and secure the American people.
I understand your concern.
So, yeah, that's H.R. McMaster, National Security Advisor. Someone I think was in the live comments was asking what his name was. H.R. I think stands for Henry, if that's what you were asking. Maybe he doesn't like the name Henry, so he's H.R. McMaster, National Security Advisor. And he was in the room, and you heard definite spin there, and then he decided to, like, stonewall any further talk about what they, did he bring up the election? But he doesn't sound like, the meddling in the election doesn't sound like he did. They talked about that later in the panel discussion. And I think that George Stephanopoulos did a better job than Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, asking the same question basically of Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, who was also in the room. And you'll see he has almost the exact same talking points you heard from H.R. McMaster. So it's pretty much the story that they decided on, and they're sticking to it. Not that, you know, they're not denying that he said what they're claiming he said in the New York Times about Comey being a nut job and firing him, taking off pressure. They're saying, well, you know, I interpreted what he said, those words, in a different way. It's all spin, and here's Rex Tillerson trying to spin what you heard H.R. McMaster spin, pretty much the same spin, but I think Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday does not follow up as much, especially given the fact that I cut out some of George Stephanopoulos' follow-up. There's one follow-up from Chris Wallace over here.
You were in the Oval Office when the president met with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov on May 10th, and according to the official summary, the president told Lavrov, I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off. My question to you, sir, as someone who was in that meeting, was he telling the Russians that firing Comey was taking off legal and political pressure?
Chris, that's not my interpretation, certainly, of the conversation. And I think what the president was trying to convey to the Russians is, look, I'm not going to be distracted by all these issues that are here home. That affect us domestically. I'm not going to let that distract from our efforts to see if we can engage with you, engage with Russia, and identify areas where we might be able to work together. The president, I think, reemphasized the message to the Russians that the relationship is at a low point, and we need to change that. We need to both work towards trying to improve that. So I think the point he was making is, I'm not going to be distracted by those things that are happening here at home, nor let them get in the way of the important work of engaging Russia to see what can be done to improve this relationship.
But sir, he seemed to be saying that firing Comey would help remove one of the distractions.
Chris, I just didn't, my takeaway from that conversation was not that point at all. I think, again, the president was simply saying to the Russians, these issues at home are not going to get in the way of my effort and the effort of my government to see if we can find a way to move this relationship forward.
You said that.
So obviously that's their story and they're sticking to it. I don't know if all that exists are notes or if there's actual recordings of what took place. There, apparently Vladimir Putin offered to provide transcripts to help out his friend Donald on what happened in the Oval Office, and that I think someone I'm going to show in just a minute is going to find pretty mind-boggling. That this is going to be the reaction. You just saw two administration officials. Now I'm going to show a Democrat and a Republican who both think not only the New York Times story quote is difficult to deal with, but just the idea of the meeting itself. The first person I'm going to show here is Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. And then I'm going to show John McCain, Senator John McCain. But first, this is Adam Schiff talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning, talking about how he was shocked, especially the jovial, the way that they were so jovial in the Oval Office with the Russians, and his mind will be boggled by the time you see the end of this clip from, like I said, from CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper this morning over here.
Times, which reported that when President Trump went behind the Oval Office closed doors with Russian officials, he told them that firing FBI Director James Comey had relieved, quote, great pressure on him. Let me read you President Trump's words, according to this report. Quote, I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off, unquote. What was your response when you read those comments?
Well, I think I was shocked like everyone else that here he is having a meeting with the Russians, his first meeting with the Foreign Minister Lavrov, as well as Ambassador Kislyak. And rather than press them on their interference in our election, we see these images of them having a jovial time in the Oval Office, and he's telling them that he thinks the FBI director was a nut job and that he's gotten rid of him to relieve the pressure on him. And I see the spin that the White House is trying to put on this, that, well, he was communicating to the Russians that then he could work with the Russians on issues of importance. If the representations are accurate, no, he was talking about it removing the pressure on him. And of course, that's very consistent with his interview with Lester Holt. But the fact that he'd be having this conversation with the Russians at all is mind-boggling. The fact that the president of Russia, Putin, would be trying to validate him by offering his own transcripts is just head-spinning. But it does underscore just how ill-prepared for this job this president was. But it also, for those of us that are pursuing the Russia probe, raises profound questions about whether he is trying to interfere or impede it in any way.
James Comey has agreed to testify.
That was pretty harsh, and of course, I have to apologize. In the introduction of that clip, I said that Adam Schiff was going to say that the fact that Vladimir Putin offered to give transcripts of what happened in the Oval Office to back up his friend Donald Trump was mind-boggling, but no, actually that part was head-spinning, not mind-boggling, so I apologize to my viewers for that error. But it was not just Adam Schiff, the Democrat from California, who was, you saw from that clip that he was in Sacramento, I think, because there was the California Democratic Party had its convention here in Sacramento this weekend, and so I assume that's why he was here. And it wasn't just the Democrat from California, who I like, Adam Schiff. It was also Senator John McCain, who agreed that not only was the New York Times report shocking or mind-boggling, or I can't remember exactly what word John McCain uses, but he thinks the idea of the meeting itself is a big problem. And this is the clip I promised where you hear he says that he met with the stooge of a thug, and that's just the beginning of his anti-Russian rhetoric over talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, but talking about the same New York Times story, quoting Donald Trump bad-mouthing James Comey and saying that his firing took pressure off of him over here.
The president should never have let Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov into the Oval Office in the first place last week. Now it turns out, and I want to put this back up on the screen, that Mr. Trump, according to the official summary, told Lavrov, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." How do you read that, sir?
I don't know how to read it except that I'm almost speechless because I don't know why someone would say something like that. But I know this: Mr. Lavrov is the stooge of a thug and a murderer who used Russian precision weapons to strike hospitals in Aleppo, who's committed human rights violations all over the place, has invaded Ukraine, has taken Crimea, has acted in the most thuggish and outrageous fashion, and he had no business in the Oval Office. If there's a president to Putin engagement in a meeting, I think that's under the right circumstances, that might be okay. But not this stooge Lavrov, who is nothing but a propagandist.
The president is considering...
Adam Schiff was pretty harsh on Donald Trump. John McCain was pretty harsh on the Russians. I mean, I think in both cases you could make a good case that the targets of their harshness deserve the harshness. But I also was... kind of admiring in sort of a videographer sense the use of the Putin pictures they put in the background, because that was not a live interview, so they get to, like, on the other side of the, in half the screen, they fill up Putin pictures. I like the first one especially. You can go back and look where it's like this Putin sort of ominously in the snow. It made me think of Game of Thrones, winter is coming. Putin would probably be a good Game of Thrones character. I don't know, it seems almost like Game of Thrones has come into our universe. You can let me know if you think that's true. Maybe it's not quite that bad, but it is also, I was also really amused by John McCain's other answer that I wanted to show you. This is that clip that was in the CBS news story about how we're getting to Watergate proportions on this scandal. And this is, and you'll see there's a longer clip where it actually mentions another shoe dropping from the centipede. That's what I criticized CBS for not showing. Well, here you'll see John McCain he does this thing that I can't believe so many of the politicians who go on the Sunday morning news analysis shows do this. They like contradict themselves. Like you'll see John McCain says, well, after calling it a scandal, says, well, I'm not sure it's a scandal. And, well, it's an easy follow-up for Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning. Over here.
A lot of attention this week with some remarks you made, you're already beginning to laugh about it, about the investigation into possible links between Russia and the Trump campaign. Here you are.
I think it's reaching the point where it's of Watergate size and scale and a couple of other scandals that you and I have seen. It's a centipede that the shoe continues to drop.
What exactly are you saying?
True. What I'm saying is that we're now, with the appointment of Mr. Mueller, we're now at that stage of a scandal. And now the question is, how is it handled? Is it handled the way Watergate was, where it's drip, drip, drip out every day, more and more? Or do we handle it like Ronald Reagan handled Iran-Contra? It's a scandal. He fired people. He went on national television and said, we made mistakes, we did wrong, and we're not going to do it again, and the American people let him move forward. And so what I was saying is there's two ways of handling a situation such as this. With the appointment of Mr. Mueller, it obviously is now at that level. The point is, do we get it behind us, get all the information out there, and move forward? The American people are very forgiving. The American people understand that no one is infallible. And so what my point was, let's get all the facts out, let's move forward and try to address the challenges that face this nation, which I would argue are probably more diverse and more challenging than any time since the end of the Cold War.
Senator, do you think this is a scandal?
I don't know if you want to use the word scandal.
That's what you used it.
Yeah. You know, the politician's prayer, may the words I utter today be tender and sweet because tomorrow I may have to eat them. I'm reminded of that. What I was saying was what I just described to you. I think if you want to use the word scandal, that's fine, as I did. The point is, it's a challenge to Washington, D.C., the way we do business, a challenge to bipartisanship, and a challenge to the effectiveness of this newly elected president.
Some Democrats.
So that was kind of a, I don't know, was it an amusing way for Senator John McCain to get out of the fact that he was contradicting himself in within that one 2-minute clip as to, you know, is it a scandal? It's a scandal, but I don't want to call it a scandal, or I'm going to eat my words on that. But what that really shows you, remember when I was talking about removing Donald Trump from office, impeachment and removal? If you go to the Constitution, 2/3 of the senators present. You know, right now there are 52 Republicans. Even if the Democrats take over the Senate in 2018, which, I don't know, may in some ways be harder than taking over the House, and it would have to be like a historic wave election for Democrats to take over both houses, especially because there's so many more vulnerable Democrats than Republicans in the 2018 election cycle. That makes it very difficult. And even if they do take it over, it's not going to be by a 2/3 margin. And it takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president. So that includes someone like John McCain, and it would also include someone like Senator Marco Rubio, who reacted to this same issue, or actually this is a reaction to the obstruction of justice issue. And I'm going to give a little bit of legal analysis of obstruction of justice, watching this clip of Marco Rubio talking about, is there obstruction of justice? And then I'm going to show another Republican and then a Democratic pundit talk specifically about impeachment on, but that'll be also from Jake Tapper a little later. But first, this is Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union talking to Marco Rubio, showing Trump in some ways seeming to admit to obstruction of justice, and then other clips about that. And here's Marco Rubio giving his opinion on obstruction of justice that I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
The White House is not disputing those comments as reported in the New York Times. And I guess there are a lot of Americans who are looking at this growing body of information and wondering what exactly is going on here. We have the comments that he made to the Russian officials, according to that document. President Trump recently told NBC's Lester Holt that the Russia investigation was on his mind when he made the decision to fire Director Comey. Take a listen.
But regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
So we have that. We have what he told the Russians, according to that document. A source close to Comey tells us that President Trump urged the FBI director to back off investigating Michael Flynn. This is in a Comey memo, saying, I hope you can let this go. As an attorney, as a U.S. senator, do you consider this to be a growing body of evidence that the president might have attempted to obstruct justice?
We don't know yet. Number one, I haven't seen those notes. Number two, we have yet to take the testimony from Director Comey. You say someone who knows him says, well, we're going to have him in 2 weeks in front of the Intelligence Committee. He'll be asked that question. So in 2 weeks, we'll know a lot more based on the testimony that he gives under oath before the committee and the country publicly. Until then, we won't know. As far as the president's comment, that's always been the White House's position, that this whole thing is a farce. That's their position. Our job in the Intelligence Committee has been to look at this entire episode for the purposes of counterintelligence in particular, and then arrive at the facts, put them out in a report, and move on from there. And that's what we're endeavoring to do in a bipartisan way. And again, the best way to do that is not to litigate it in the press, but to do our work and put the report in a way that is credible so no one can deny its credibility and no one can say that we went into it already having made up our minds. This I can tell you for a fact. No matter what the facts are, I want them to go wherever they take us, irrespective of what outcome it reaches one way or the other. My interests here are clear, and I don't think anyone has ever doubted the concern that I have about Russian interference. Back in October, I was running for re-election, and it looked like my race was going to be very close. I may have been the only Republican in the country running for Congress who refused to discuss WikiLeaks, use it against my opponent, or use it against Secretary Clinton, because I said it was the work of a foreign intelligence agency. I said it then, I believe it now. I think our report will lay that out, and any other facts pertinent to that.
When you're looking for these facts, let me just ask you, if you come to the conclusion that President Trump fired James Comey because he wanted to relieve the pressure of the FBI investigation into his campaign team, would that disturb you? Would that be obstruction of justice?
Well, again, I think, let me say it this way. If any president tries to impede an investigation, any president, no matter who it is, by interfering with the FBI, yes, that would be problematic. It would be, not just problematic, it would be, obviously a potential obstruction of justice that people have to make a decision on. Any president. That said, we don't know if that's what's happened here. And we can't make that decision, and I'm certainly going to not make pronouncements at that level of magnitude solely on the basis of what an anonymous source told the press. I am not disputing the press accounts, but I am also not going to accept them, especially being in the position that I'm in, where we're going to have access to Director Comey, hopefully to the notes, and to all sorts of other information that will give us true, complete insight into all of this. That's only fair to the president. That's only fair to the country. But we need to go through the steps to get there. Otherwise, this appears political and partisan, and there'll be ongoing doubts about whatever we find if we don't do it that way.
There are a lot of Democrats and independents.
See, Senator Marco Rubio at the end there says we need to go through the steps. In fact, that kind of made me think of Mr. Spock and climb the steps of Mount Saleya. That's the only way you get to impeachment. There are many, many steps. You have to climb the steps of the U.S. Constitution. And he was talking about obstruction of justice. And really the only remedy for the president committing obstruction of justice is impeachment, which it's totally political. It depends on whether you have a majority of the members of the House willing to vote for it, and then 2/3 of the senators present willing to remove the president for doing it. Last week I talked a lot about obstruction of justice. I don't want to go into it so much, although when it comes to the issue of impeachment, I do agree, like I said, with my super chat donator here, that Democrats should let the investigations continue. I appreciate that super chat donation. And speaking of impeachment and donations, in my P.O. box, I actually got something called impeachment tea. See, here's like a and this is from the, you can find this at the tbook.com. It's, here's the envelope. They sent it to my P.O. box, which is, you can find it's in my bar record, which is available to the public. It came from Robertson Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. I actually used to live on Robertson Boulevard right by the 10 freeway when I was in paralegal school, like right around the time of the Rodney King riots. So that sort of dates me a little bit. And this is what it's actual tea. It's in here. Let me see if I can impeach. I don't know if you can see that very well on my camera. Impeachment tea. And I don't know if I should drink tea sent to me by a stranger to my P.O. box, but they seem to be reasonable people, and I do kind of want to encourage people to send me stuff for free to my P.O. box. It's P.O. Box 255313, Sacramento, California 95865, if you want to send something to my P.O. box. So I wanted to mention that in the whole impeachment issue. And I showed Senator Marco Rubio there and how he was waiting for the steps to be climbed before we can even get to obstruction of justice. I talked about the two statutes. Here's one of them. This is 18 U.S.C. 1505. That's kind of like obstructing justice, impeding a congressional investigation. And then there's 18 U.S.C. 1512. That's obstructing justice in terms of official proceedings. And I put links to these two statutes down in the video description, as well as to analysis from the Congressional Research Service back in 2014 as to all the elements, like the word corrupt. It has to be done corruptly, and that's a specific intent crime. And then there's even a question as to whether an FBI investigation is an official proceeding. And so, but it's not a real prosecution. It's going to be an impeachment proceeding is the only way to go after the actual President of the United States for obstruction of justice, at least so far in U.S. history. So it would be a political question, not really a legal question. So that is my obstruction of justice analysis. And now I want to move on to the last few clips of the broadcast. The next one is a Republican and a pundit Democrat. Bakari Sellers used to be a state senator, and now he's like a CNN pundit. He's also talking to Jake Tapper about impeachment, and you'll see Jake Tapper is very he sort of scoffs at the idea of impeachment as being ridiculous. But first he shows this clip to Republican Adam Kinzinger about Trump denying that he talked to Comey about stopping the Flynn investigation. So it's like a Republican, then a Democrat, in a clip I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
Did you at any time urge former FBI Director James Comey in any way, shape, or form to close or to back down the investigation into Michael Flynn? And also, as you look back...
No. Next question.
That was President Trump disputing a report this week that he fired FBI Director Comey precisely because he did not like the investigation into whether Trump's associates colluded with Russia in any way. It was a head-spinning week. We've gathered some smart people this morning to help us sort through it. Congressman Kinzinger, let me start with you. You heard our interview with Marco Rubio. There is this growing, some of it hearsay, at least as of now, but growing body of evidence that the reason that President Trump fired Comey was stated with Lester Holt, stated with the Russians, according to that New York Times story, stated, and then there's also the report of Comey and a memo saying that the president tried to get him to back off the Flynn investigation. Does this concern you?
Well, it's all concerning. I think, look, as a current member of Congress, I have to be careful because to make accusations and to assume based on what you've heard in the media, based on a report you haven't seen, we need all this information to make that case. And that's why I actually called for the appointment of a special prosecutor the morning before it actually happened, because in my mind, this thing has become so political. Any new piece of news that comes out, I hear friends on the left that just scream impeachment, like, holy cow, that's irresponsible. And then some of my friends on the right are like, everything that comes out is fake and not real. So I realize that I don't think no matter what happens, it's going to be seen through the political spectrum of what your preconceived notion is. We need honest answers. It's not going to necessarily change what people think. But one of my biggest concerns right now is not 2018 or 2020. It's the institution of the U.S. government, and the faith in government has been so undermined that I actually worry about stability in the long term. So for me, this special prosecutor, special counsel, is the best way to try to get to an answer that most people can look at and say, I agree, disagree, whatever that turns out to be.
And in fact, here's President Trump being asked at that press conference about impeachment. Take a listen.
As you look back over the past 6 months or year, have you had any recollection where you've wondered if anything you have done has been something that might be worthy of criminal charges in these investigations or impeachment, as some on the left are implying?
I think it's totally ridiculous. Everybody thinks so.
Does it concern you when you hear voices on the left calling for impeachment? A Democratic congressman from Texas did so a few days ago, when the evidence, the factual evidence, not just the circumstantial evidence or media reports, is not there yet?
Well, I do think you have to be cautious, and I think you actually have to applaud the people on the right, like congressmen, who actually had the courage to come out and say things like, we need a special counsel, a special prosecutor. I hope that doesn't hurt you in the election. But
it's Illinois.
It's Illinois. But I also think that you have things like obstruction of justice. And in my criminal law background, I can tell you what obstruction of justice is, and you don't have to look at conjecture. You don't have to have an opinion. You can just look at the president's own words and see that you can build a legitimate case that is obstructing justice. And moving forward, we know that the first article in the articles of impeachment for both Clinton and Nixon were both obstruction of justice. And we do know that there's a lot of smoke in the White House. And usually where there's smoke, there's fire.
Senator?
Well, first off,
So, Bakari Sellers there is right that obstruction of justice is a charge for impeachment for both Clinton and Nixon. Clinton was impeached, Nixon resigned, and Clinton was not removed. I remember that whole era, and that's one of the reasons that I know how impeachment and removal works so well, not just from reading it in the Constitution I was talking about earlier, but I also thought that Adam Kinzinger, as a Republican, came across pretty reasonable there, and especially having called for a special counsel. It's actually a special counsel, not a special prosecutor. There's a slight difference, and I'm going to show a clip of Adam Schiff talking about what a special prosecutor can do and what congressional investigations can do as the final clip in just a minute. But first I want to show some House Republicans on the Government Oversight Committee. First, this is another Republican-Democrat pair, kind of like Adam Kinzinger and Bakari Sellers in that last clip. This is the chair of that Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz, who is going to be resigning from Congress at the end of June. And then Elijah Cummings, who's like an icon of the House of Representatives and a civil rights hero. He's the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee. And first, you'll hear Jason Chaffetz say something that's true, that all these news reports are based on anonymous sources and no one's seen these documents. So before we really talk about impeachment, we definitely need to get all the facts. And that's kind of like what my Super Chat contributor Ika talks, if that's that Democrats have to let all the facts come in and focus on the issues, and I definitely agree with that. And you'll see Elijah Cummings say that, but he also kind of, I think, throws a little shade at Jason Chaffetz and the Republicans when he talks about how he likes to get the facts first and then come to his conclusions, unlike some of these investigations where they get their conclusions first and then look for the facts, which Benghazi, excuse me, did I just sneeze there? I think Benghazi, I'm sorry, that was Benghazi, that was my little Benghazi joke, and I think that's kind of what Elijah Cummings is talking about, because Jason Chaffetz was like Mr. Benghazi for a while, and you can see them talking about that over in this clip.
Important to remember, nobody's actually seen these documents. Even the reporter at the New York Times has not seen these documents. So there's been an awful lot written and said about it, but I don't even know that the Department of Justice has them. Maybe Director Comey has them. I don't know where they reside. I don't know if they are documents. but we're certainly pursuing them. And if they're there, I hope we find them and get them sooner rather than later.
And Congressman Cummings, when you look at the pattern of the president's interactions with the former FBI director, as I was asking Senator Sass earlier, the meetings in January, the meeting in February, the firing of James Comey, what we've learned about the notes of James Comey, some of your Democratic colleagues are already seeing there the beginnings of a case for impeachment. Are they right, or is that going too far?
I think that we need to gather the facts. I've been always one to be very careful with regard to the gathering of the facts and then coming to the conclusions, as opposed to having a conclusion and trying to search for the facts. I've seen that in the past so many times. I think that that'll take care of itself. But basically, George, there are three things going on here. One, we've got to figure out what this whole idea of the Russians interfering with our elections was all about. After all, 17 of our intelligence agencies said it did happen. Two, we've got to figure out whether there was collusion, and that I'm sure that'll come out. And three, we've got to figure out exactly whether there was some type of cover-up. That's how I see this. And so all along, we're going to have to look at it very carefully. But again, the Congress has its role. We have a role for an independent commission, and certainly the special counsel.
One of the other things we learned, Mr. Chairman, this...
You know, I think Elijah Cummings is like such a font of reason. He usually comes across really reasonably, and I think he made the case there really well. And it seemed, like I said before I showed the clip, that he was throwing a little shade at Jason Chaffetz there about how the facts come before the conclusion, not the conclusion, then the facts. And I talked about that before the clip. But I also thought that, you know, in terms of Watergate, they were talking about Watergate, and John McCain mentioned Watergate earlier, and I mentioned Watergate last week in terms of the Watergate proportions of this scandal. One of the big phrases from Watergate is, this is a cancer on the presidency, or there's a cancer on the presidency. And now it's, you heard in Elijah Cummings' comments there that it's actually up to like stage 3 now, because first there's the Russian meddling in the election, and then that was stage 1, then stage 2, possibility of collusion. We don't know, you know, between the Trump campaign and Russia. That's still unproven, but under investigation. And then stage 3, the cover-up. That's what they get you on. You know, there's a special counsel now, and that's what the what's his name, Fitzgerald, who investigated Cheney and ended up getting Scooter Libby for lying during the investigation. That, I mean, it's the cover-up sometimes. Or very often the cover-up, not the crime. That's kind of a cliche, conventional wisdom. Sorry about that. But in terms of what a special prosecutor can do versus what congressional investigations do, that's the last clip I want to show for you. This is about 47 seconds long, and then I will conclude the program after we watch Adam Schiff explain the different utilities of those two types of investigations. Over here.
Make one other point on this, Jake, because I know there's a lot of speculation that with the appointment of Bob Mueller, who is, I think, a superb choice, that somehow this is going to mean that the congressional investigations are diminished or can go away. Far from it. The only thing that has changed is our point of contact with the Justice Department. But at the end of Bob Mueller's investigation, if he makes a decision not to bring any charges, he's not likely to say a word about that decision. It's going to fall to the Congress to explain what we found and what we didn't. And even if it results in indictments by Bob Mueller, he may not be able to speak much beyond the four corners of those indictments. So we have very different responsibilities, and both, I think, are enormously important.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, thanks so much for your time, sir.
So that's a good point from Adam Schiff, that a special counsel might decide not to indict, and unlike James Comey, when he decided not to indict Hillary Clinton and then gave this big long press conference saying how she was like reckless or like very, very careless or whatever. I think it was like extremely careless, something like that. That's not what a prosecutor is supposed to do. That's why so many Democrats are legitimately upset with James Comey, and that's the excuse Donald Trump used when he fired him, that his handling of that, you know, that's what the Deputy Attorney General Rob Rosenstein, is that his name? I can never remember his last name for sure, but he said it was, he mishandled the Hillary Clinton investigation, and when a prosecutor decides not to indict, they're really not supposed to say anything. They're just supposed to say, or when the grand jury decides not to indict, not the prosecutor. But anyway, that's the last clip I want to show. But it is important that Congress does its own investigation, possibly even like a independent commission doing the investigation in addition to the special counsel. But like I said, I have to conclude the show. I appreciate all of you who joined me for the live show. For those of you who watch the recorded show, you can support me, like I said, as a patron on Patreon at a link down in the video description, or you can just support me by posting positive comments. I've been reading the live comments along the way, most of which are supportive, so I appreciate that. This is an ongoing story. You remember the political comedy at the beginning that it's like previously on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, they fired Trump fired James Comey. Now it turns out that, and it's like who knows what's going to happen in the next week, but I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future. There's no Real Time with Bill Maher for 1 week, and then that was the season finale of Saturday Night Live, so they won't be back till next September, I guess. But Real Time with Bill Maher will be back in 2 weeks. I guess I'll just have to come up with my own political comedy based on the news clips, but I actually could have chosen several of those that I didn't choose this week. I hope you enjoyed the clips I did pick out, and until I am back next week, or until I have time finally to make an edited, produced video, which I haven't been able to do for so long, but maybe this will be the week, you never know. There's one clip from Rex Tillerson about this isn't his first sword dance that I might make a video out of, but anyway, until I do that, or until I'm back next week on the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.